For my first stop, I went to the Pioneer Living History Museum to see a landmark from one of the most infamous feuds in the American West. Arizona has a bit of wild history, and thanks in large part to Hollywood, most people are familiar with spots like Tombstone. But the bloodiest tale in Arizona history is something most people probably aren't familiar with. You've heard of the Hatfields and McCoys, but have you heard of the Grahams and Tewksburys? The decade-long conflict between these two families resulted in twice as many casualties as the Hatfields and McCoys, and was so volatile it delayed Arizona's statehood by 10 years. The story began the way many of these stories typically do, between two neighbors who were friends. The Tewksburys moved out to Arizona, and John Tewksbury Sr. built what is now known as the Flying V cabin, which you can see here. They then invited their friend Tom Graham and his family out to Arizona to begin ranching. But within a short amount of time, the two families started accusing the other of stealing horses and cattle. Although nobody knows exactly what initially started the conflict, with theories ranging from sheep to dividing spoils over cattle rustling to a fight over a woman. But the families eventually decided to meet with the intention of settling the issue. But that quickly turned into a shootout. Then things really escalated when a Basque sheep herder was robbed and killed by a member of the Graham gang. From that point, the entire valley took sides, and from there, it was all-out war. The conflict became known as the Pleasant Valley War, and in the years that followed, chaos ensued. There were murders, lynchings, booby traps, hired gangs, people were beheaded, ranches were burned to the ground, and shootouts became commonplace. Some of the evidence of their conflict is left here at the Flying V cabin. This cabin was built in 1880 by John Tewksbury Sr. and saw its fair share of drama. Even before the family conflict, it was raided by Apaches in the Battle of Big Dry Wash in 1882. And you can see the cabin was designed with defense in mind. You'll notice there are no windows, but there are notched gun ports. These ports obviously were not designed to let sunlight in, but rather to let gunfire out. You'll also see the cabin is riddled with bullet holes. Most of these bullet holes occurred during an 1887 shootout during the family feud and serve as evidence of its rich and violent history. When it was all said and done, the Pleasant Valley War had the largest death toll of any family feud in U.S. history. By the end of the battle, nearly every male of both families was dead. The battle finally ended in 1892 when the last male of the Tewksbury family murdered the last male of the Graham family. News of the feud spread across the country and was part of the reason Arizona's statehood was delayed a full decade. The Flying V cabin stands here today to remind us that some feuds simply aren't worth it. But it's not the only attraction here at the Pioneer Living History Museum. For more on that, I spoke with Karen Chen.
Our museum is about educating school children and the public about life in territorial Arizona. Our time frame is the 19th century, and so we span from the late 1860s to the 1910s, the turn of the century. And what we have here is original buildings. We have over 10 original buildings that have either been lifted and carried from different parts of the state or taken apart and reassembled once here on property. And then we also have kind of filled in the town with replicas of buildings that were actually existing in history. The thing that I just love about Pioneer Living History Museum is that the location out in the middle of the desert, it really gives you that sense of that pioneer life, the dedication and fortitude that they needed to live out here, because it is isolated, especially when you get out to the back cabins such as Ashurst and that Flying V cabin. You really feel that isolation that these pioneer families had to experience, and you get that taste of that for yourself.